She had curled herself into the narrow space between the cinder block wall and the last stall in the women's restroom on the first floor of the Montgomery County Courthouse, knees tucked to chest, chin resting on the threadbare ear of a stuffed rabbit with one black button eye missing, while the terrazzo floor leached heat through the thin cotton of her leggings and into her bones. It was 4:12 on a gray Thursday in mid-October. The hand dryers roared on and off in uneven bursts, loud enough to swallow small sounds, and the fluorescent tubes above the mirrors gave every surface the color of old milk. Her damp Walmart sneakers sat side by side outside the stall door, toes aligned, laces tied in careful double knots, cardboard insoles dark with rainwater and cut to fit by hands that had done this before. She made no sound. In that restroom, the smells layered one over another the way court files, layered in steel cabinets upstairs. Bleach from a mop bucket parked by the sink, wet wool from coats shaken out in the hall, old paper from legal packets tucked under arms, and the metallic tang of rain dragged in on shoe soles and umbrella tips. Someone flushed in the first stall and left. Someone washed her hands for exactly 20 seconds, dried them twice, and left. A deputy's radio crackled beyond the heavy door and went quiet again. The little girl did not move except to pull the stuffed rabbit closer beneath her chin, as if she were trying to disappear into a space smaller than herself, as if she had practiced becoming still enough that adults would stop looking. By 4:19, 7 women had entered and exited the room. One glanced at the shoes and kept walking. One paused at the sink and listened to the row of stalls, then reapplied lipstick and tucked the tube back into a purse with a courthouse badge clipped to the strap. One of the maintenance staff, 62 years old, left knee wrapped in an elastic brace under navy slacks, pushed a caution sign near the threshold, looked down the stall doors, and moved on toward the hall. Nobody crouched. Nobody called out softly. Nobody said, "Sweetheart, are you all right in there?" She wasn't crying. Outside security, the girl's mother stepped through the magnetometer with a plastic folder under one arm and a restraining order packet clipped in blue ink to the front, her knuckles white around the edge where the folder had cracked at the hinge. The deputy at screening told her to empty her pockets. She set down 2 bus transfers, 1 house key, and a folded receipt from Hartwell Diner where coffee refills cost $1.50 if you looked like you needed to sit a while. Her hair was damp at the ends from rain, and the cuffs of her cardigan were dark where she had wiped her face without realizing she was doing it. She did not ask for sympathy. She asked where she could wait safely until copies were processed. The answer came in policy terms and pointed down a corridor that closed at 5. Main Street kept moving like it always moved, indifferent and exact. Bus brakes hissed at the curb in front of the clerk's annex. A delivery truck idled 3 minutes outside the records entrance, then pulled away. Fryer grease from Hartwell Diner drifted across the block whenever the kitchen door opened, warm and salty against the cold, wet smell of October rain. Inside the annex, fluorescent ballast hummed with a faint mosquito buzz that had been there for years and never reached maintenance priority. The courthouse clock above the north steps ran 1 minute fast, just as it had since at least 2017, and people adjusted their lives to it without talking about it. What happened that afternoon did not arrive with dramatic weather or siren. It arrived in ordinary civic light. At 4:27, the first cluster of riders turned onto Main in 2s and 3s, engines low and steady, tires whispering over wet pavement. At first, they looked like any late-season group ride headed somewhere else. Black leather darkened by drizzle, denim stiff at the knee, chrome beaded with rain. Then more came from the westbound lane. Then more from the feeder street behind the post office. Helmets, bare heads, patched vests, heavy boots. By 4:34, the count had passed 200. By 4:41, it crossed 500. They did not rev for spectacle. They rolled into staggered rows along the curb and courthouse lawn, with disciplined spacing, headlights angled down, engines ticking as they cooled. The number settled at 800. People on the steps reacted before anyone said a word. A clerk from Civil Filings, 39, who had worked that building 12 years, froze halfway through lighting a cigarette she had promised herself she would quit. A man waiting for traffic court shifted his son behind his leg, though the boy was 17 and taller than him. Two jurors who had spent all week deciding fault in a slip-and-fall case moved toward the revolving door and stopped there, watching. Tattoos, scars, broad shoulders under wet leather, chain wallets, rings on weathered hands. The same visual markers were suddenly everywhere at once. Conversations thinned, shoulders tightened, faces turned toward the curb as the drizzle continued to fall. Then the arrangement held. Front wheels were turned in identical angles so pedestrians could still pass. No one blocked the ADA ramps. No one crowded the emergency lane. No one shouted across engines for attention. They parked with the kind of spatial awareness that comes from years of riding close without touching steel. On the north lawn, where campaign signs had stood the week before, riders formed clean lines that left a clear corridor from security doors to the street. On the south curb, they left 15 feet open in front of the ambulance access point. Even through courthouse glass, the order was visible. At 4:46, rain hardened for 6 minutes, tapping helmet shells and courthouse windows with the same steady rhythm, then eased back to a fine mist. A woman from probation whispered, "What is this?" to no one in particular. No one answered. The riders did not address the bystanders. Their presence gathered weight by sheer arithmetic. 800 men and women in leather in front of a county building that had treated danger as a form to be stamped and routed. A deputy near the doors rested his palm on his radio mic and did not key it. He kept watching the line fill in along the west curb, rider after rider, each arriving quiet, each taking a place as if this had been mapped long before rain touched the stone steps. Inside, beneath the hand-dryer roar and fluorescent hum, the little girl remained in her corner by the last stall, rabbit tucked beneath her chin, shoes waiting outside the door. She had not asked anyone in the restroom for help. She had already measured what help cost. Her mother stood one floor up with paper that had the right signatures and the wrong kind of power unless somebody chose to honor it in real time. Between those two truths, Dayton carried on with docket calls, copier jams, and late buses, and the county's prevailing story about danger stood in full view on the courthouse lawn, soaked and idling. Sometimes the people a town has learned to fear are the only ones who treat a court order like a life-preserving document instead of a receipt. And by 4:52 on that gray Thursday, with 800 engines settling into silence and the crowd still watching from behind glass, that old story was about to meet a harder fact. What the crowd on the courthouse steps expected from 800 riders was noise, provocation, a reason to confirm what they had always said about men and women in patched leather. What they got first was discipline, and then restraint, and then the unnerving sight of people they had written off behaving like the only adults in the block. A county building taught people to trust badges, clipboards, and posted hours. Leather had never made that list. Yet at 4:53, with rain running in thin threads down the stone balustrades, the riders held their lines without a word from any deputy, and the mother, with the blue ink packet, stood behind security glass, with her hands still shaking, and understood one hard thing before anyone explained it. Fear and safety were not the same category, no matter how long her town had pretended they were. She stayed near the wall beside the pamphlet rack, because she had learned to keep her back protected in public places. one shoulder touching painted cinder block, eyes moving from doorway to window to corridor and back again, while courthouse staff crossed in front of her, carrying file bins and coffee cups, and the practiced expressions of people leaving on time. Her restraining order packet was clipped and signed and stamped. It was also, until that moment, only paper. Outside, engines ticked as they cooled, a dry metallic sound like cast iron settling after heat. And those small ticks carried through the glass more clearly than the voices in the lobby. The deputy at screening, a broad man named Carl Minter, with 20 years in uniform and a wedding ring polished, thin on one edge, kept his posture neutral and his thumb near his shoulder radio, though he never keyed it. "Keep the north doors clear," he said to the younger officer at the belt scanner, and the younger officer nodded without taking his eyes off the lawn. Nobody had to tell the riders to keep those doors clear. They had left the corridor open on their own, as exact as if they were measuring with tape. On the courthouse steps, a woman with a stroller stopped under the overhang, looked at the line of motorcycles, then at the riders standing by their front wheels with hands loose at their sides. One rider in a dark green rain shell stepped back without speaking and opened a space so she could pass. A man with a cane misjudged the slick curb and wobbled. Two riders moved at once, one on each side, steadying him and then retreating before he could thank them. The crowd watched those gestures and did not know where to put them. The old story had no shelf for this version. At 4:56, a gust pushed rain sideways across Main Street, and the smell of fryer grease drifted from Hartwell Diner, warm and salted, cutting through the wet cement chill. The courthouse clock above the north steps still ran 1 minute fast. A bus sighed to a stop by the annex and discharged 9 people, 3 with umbrella tips capped in red rubber, one carrying a cardboard archive box gone soft at the corners. They glanced at the riders, tightened their coats, and hurried in under the detector arch, entering a building that had procedures for every kind of paper and very little imagination for panic that arrived before dusk. Inside the women's restroom, the maintenance worker with the knee brace came back for her caution sign and found the same pair of small sneakers still lined up outside the last stall. She paused again, longer this time. "Honey," she said through the door, her voice tired but gentle. "We're closing this floor soon." The stall latch clicked. The little girl stepped out with the stuffed rabbit under her arm, chin lowered, hair parted neatly by someone who had once taken time in the morning, even if that morning felt far away now. She did not ask where to go. She waited for instruction. Her mother reached the restroom door 40 seconds later, having asked twice at 2 different counters where a person with an active order should wait after hours, and having received 2 answers that used the phrase standard process and did not include safety. When she saw her daughter standing by the sink with wet socks and the rabbit pressed to her chest, she exhaled once through her teeth, crouched, and slid the Walmart sneakers back on those small feet, with fingers stiff from cold and adrenaline. She tied each lace in a double knot. The child held still, as if she knew movement made things harder for adults already at their limit. From the first-floor hall, the courthouse looked like every courthouse in the region, built between 1968 and 1979. Terrazzo scuffed pale where thousands of souls had crossed, acoustic tile stained in 4 places where roof leaks had been patched and patched again, framed county photographs hung 2 inches crooked because the screws never quite set true in block walls. The fluorescent hum was constant. So was the smell of wet wool now that people were coming in from rain. Through the glass doors, the motorcycles remained in formation, chrome dim under overcast sky, helmets hooked to handlebars in matching arcs. No one banged on the doors. No one demanded access. By 5:01, the public law library on the second floor had switched to evening posture. Half the overhead bank lights off to save power, two lamps glowing over the circulation desk, computer screens logging users out one by one, laminated signs taped at eye level listed rules in 14-point type: no food, no sleeping, limit printing to 25 pages. The carpet had a pattern of blue-gray squares chosen to hide coffee stains, and did exactly that. The smell in that room was old glue, printer toner, damp coats, and pages that had turned for decades. It was a place built for quiet argument, not crisis. The mother guided her daughter there because a clerk had said it would stay open 5 more minutes, and because 5 more minutes was still something. At the copier by the north wall, she fed the restraining order packet, face up, then face down, then face up again, hands trembling enough that the machine chirped error 3 times and flashed "Reload Original" in blocky green letters. On the 4th try, the page went through and emerged warm. Black text slightly skewed left. Judge's signature still legible. She touched the paper like she was checking for a pulse. Near the reference shelves, 2 men in work jackets argued in whispers over a property tax appeal form. At the public terminals, a college kid in a Bengals cap printed case notes he would not finish reading tonight. Behind the desk, the circulation clerk, Elaine Dobbins, 58, bifocals on a bead chain and peppermint tins lined in a perfect row beside her keyboard, stamped due date slips with mechanical precision, because routines were the only part of county work she could control. She saw the child first by the rabbit, then by the socks still dark at the heel. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked instead at the clock near the ceiling. At 5:03, rain tapped harder against the narrow windows, and from 2 floors below came the low, layered thrum of engines idling in shifts. Not loud, not theatrical, just present, like distant thunder that chose not to move on. The sound entered through metal window frames and up through the floor joists. People in the library heard it and tried not to. Elaine kept stamping. The copier kept warming and cooling. A heating vent clicked on with a dusty breath that smelled faintly of hot pennies. The daughter sat cross-legged between 2 shelves labeled Ohio Revised Code, volumes 2901 to 2929, and volumes 3101 to 3127, rabbit in lap, hands smoothing one ear flat, then letting it spring back. She wasn't crying. That was the detail that lodged in the room like a pin. Children who had faith in adults usually cried when they were frightened because they expected response. Silence belonged to a different education. Her mother stood 6 feet away at the copier with the packet and the custody forms in a cracked plastic folder, shoulders up near her ears, breathing shallow so she would not shake more than she already was. Outside, the riders shifted in rotating pairs to keep lanes open as office workers left for the night. A probation officer in a tan trench coat hurried through their corridor and did not make eye contact. A pastor with a folded raincoat over one arm paused at the steps, looked at the line, and went around the far side of the lawn. 2 deputies conferred under the awning and then separated without issuing a single crowd command because there was no crowd problem to solve. The feared group kept solving logistical problems without being asked. Dayton kept its ordinary texture around the edges of all this. The bakery truck on Jefferson missed its turn and backed up with a slow beep, beep, beep. A dog tied outside the pharmacy shook rain from its ears and sat again. The signal at Main and 3rd stayed out of sync by 3 seconds, as it had for months, making right turns stutter into short bursts. At Hartwell Diner, Donna Hartwell wiped down counter stools for the dinner shift and watched the courthouse through fogged glass each time the door swung open. She had owned that diner 19 years and could read a block by posture alone. This block stood differently now. At 5:06, the mother finally got clean copies of the order and slid one into the blue ink packet, one into the custody folder, one folded small into the inside pocket of her cardigan. Her fingers paused on the pocket edge, pressing once, checking the paper was really there. She looked through the window slits toward the north lawn and then down at her daughter, as if weighing two kinds of danger by sight, and deciding which one had already failed her more thoroughly. She did not need a speech to name the paradox. Her body had already done the math. The engines continued their low pulse below the library floor, steady as a held line. The courthouse fluorescent lights hummed on. The rain kept falling in thin, patient strokes against the glass. In a county that trusted forms more than fear, the people outside in soaked leather were waiting without recognition and without instruction. And inside that narrow room of statutes and copier toner, a woman with a restraining order and a 7-year-old girl finally sat down where they could both see the door. Mark Robinson was already in the room, 3 tables over from the public terminals, shoulders angled toward a stack of veterans' benefit appeal forms that had been photocopied so many times the text looked soft at the edges. He sat with his back to the west wall and his face to the door, not from paranoia anymore, just habit that had calcified into posture over decades. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his faded denim cut, and when he shifted to turn a page, his left shoulder gave a small mechanical pop he did not acknowledge. The jagged scar down his left cheek ran pale as chalk under the library's reduced evening lights. He had been in that chair 23 minutes, reading the same paragraph on service-connected disability ratings for the 4th time, because the younger writer who asked him for help had never learned how to make bureaucratic language hold still long enough to fight it. Mark had. The library was not built for men like him, and everyone in it knew that without saying it aloud. Laminated rules were taped straight, chairs were pushed in when you stood up, and the people who came there carried ballpoint pens clipped to shirt plackets and spoke in low procedural tones. Mark carried a folded legal pad in one back pocket, a phone with a cracked hinge in his vest, and hands that looked like they had spent years meeting concrete and steel. Even sitting still, he gave off the visual grammar of disruption. Thick wrists, faded tattoos climbing under his sleeves, a nose broken once and set badly, boots that left rain crescents on carpet squares. The circulation clerk had watched him when he walked in at 4:38, watched his patches, watched his hands, then watched his boots. She had eventually looked away when he asked where the revised code cross-references were kept, and said thank you when she answered. 33 years of hard living had left their mark on him in places strangers could read and places they could not. The scar on his face came from a bottle in a parking lot fight outside a VFW hall in 1996, a winter night that ended with 6 stitches and no police report because nobody there wanted paperwork. The 6 years he did inside came later, after a bar argument in Middletown went from words to fists to one bad fall, and a charge his public defender called unavoidable once the witness list was set. He never explained that case in full, not even to men he rode beside for 20 years, and the silence around it had become one more rumor people used to define him at distance. Before all that, there had been a motor pool in the Gulf, heat that bent the air above asphalt, diesel in his hair and skin no matter how hard he scrubbed, and 19-year-olds looking to him for calm when incoming made the ground jump. Men like Mark learned early that panic spread faster than fire, and that order, when it appeared, came from whoever acted first without asking permission. By 5:07 on that same gray Thursday, the clock over the periodical shelf clicked forward and the heater kicked off, leaving the room with the thin, wet chill of a building trying to save on utilities after hours. Mark flexed his left hand once, fingers stiff from old breaks and October damp, and bent over the forms again. The younger writer's name sat written on the top page in block letters, then crossed out and rewritten, because the first spelling was wrong. He underlined 2 sections in dull pencil: prior denial, supplemental evidence. His reading glasses, cheap and scratched, were perched low on his nose, and he peered over them whenever anyone crossed his field of view. He looked like a man assembled from contradictions the county preferred not to examine. Convict who read case law, biker who filed paperwork on time, veteran who still stood when the anthem played at the county fair, even when his knees protested the whole time. 14 years earlier, his wife had set a cardboard box of his clothes on a porch in Kettering and told him through a screen door that the marriage had ended long before the sentence did. He did not bang the door. He did not yell. He loaded the box into a truck borrowed from a friend and drove south in rain that looked exactly like this rain, then slept 3 nights behind an auto shop until a club brother cleared space in a garage apartment. His son had been 9 then in Toledo with his mother's sister, and now he was grown enough to sign his own lease and still did not answer Mark's calls. Every August, Mark mailed a birthday card with no return address and his name left off, just a short line in blue ink inside. Keep your head up. The cards came back twice in 14 years, forwarding expired. The rest disappeared into the ordinary machinery of delivery, like most things he hoped for. He had long ago stopped expecting institutions to make room for people with his record and his face. Jobs came through mechanics who paid cash and asked no questions, or through men who cared more about whether he showed up at 6 sharp than what came up when they ran his name. Hospital waiting rooms moved him to the edge. School offices watched his hands. Family court clerks answered him in the same clipped tone they used for anyone they had already categorized as trouble. He learned to let those moments pass through him without argument, because arguing wasted time, and time was usually what somebody else needed from him. That was the part nobody who feared him ever understood. His life had narrowed over years into 2 responsibilities he actually trusted: keep your word and protect whoever was smallest in the room. At 5:08, he heard the copier chirp error from the north wall and glanced up over the frame of his glasses. The mother stood there with a cracked plastic folder open against her hip, trying to feed a stapled packet into the slot with hands that would not settle. The child was 6 feet away between the code shelves, cross-legged on industrial carpet, smoothing one ear of a rabbit flat and letting it rise again, flat and rise in exact little rhythm. Mark watched them for a full breath. He had seen that rhythm before in other places with other names. A boy in Kuwait rubbing the edge of a dog tag until his thumb bled. A man in County Orange tapping his wrist bone against concrete through lockdown count. A woman in traffic court folding and refolding one receipt while waiting to hear if her license would be suspended. Repetition was what people did when fear had nowhere to go. The engines outside carried through the building in low-layered pulses, not loud enough to dominate, just steady enough to register in bone. Mark knew half the riders on the lawn by silhouette alone, and a quarter by the way they parked. He did not turn to look out the windows. He did not need visual confirmation to understand what formation sounded like. The chapter had not gathered for spectacle. The spacing on the curb had told him that already when he walked in. Somebody had made a call before he arrived, or several somebodies, and the county was now living inside the consequences of that decision. Still, inside this room, procedure tried to proceed as if all events were equal, and all risks could wait until morning. The circulation clerk stamped 2 books, then 3, then paused with the stamp hovering when the copier chirped again. "Ma'am, we close at 5:10, she said, not unkindly, eyes on the clock instead of the woman. The mother nodded without looking up and tried the feeder again. Paper caught. She pulled it free too fast and tore the corner. Her daughter did not look over. She kept smoothing the rabbit's ear. Mark slid his reading glasses off, folded them and placed them on top of the appeal packet with deliberate care, as if finishing one duty before stepping into another. He stood. His knees protested first, then his lower back, then the old shoulder. None of it changed his pace. He crossed to the copier in 9 unhurried steps and stopped at arm's length so she could see him before he spoke. Up close, the mother looked younger than he had judged from a distance, and older than her birth year would make sense of. Rain in the flyaway hairs by her temples. Cardigan cuffs dark and frayed, thumbnails split to the quick. The restraining order sat face up on the glass bed, blue clip bent at one corner. He recognized the form layout from helping a club sister 3 years before in Greene County. Same sections, same language that sounded firm until field reality touched it. Protected party, no contact terms, effective immediately, service pending. "You're feeding it backward," he said. She flinched at his voice before she answered herself for that flinch. "I know," she said, then shook her head. "I can't keep my hands steady." Mark turned the packet, aligned the edge against the guide, and fed it through one clean motion. The machine took it, hummed, and produced a straight copy. He handed it over without touching her fingers. "Again," he said. She nodded. He ran 2 more copies, set them in a neat stack, and stepped back to give her space. The child watched from between shelves now, rabbit tucked under her chin, eyes tracking his boots, and then his hands. She was small for 7, he guessed, maybe by a year in weight, if not age, sneakers with pink stars gone gray at the toe, damp socks dark at the heel. Her hair was parted clean and braided loose, as if someone once took time each morning and had not fully stopped. By the 2nd week of October, daylight in Dayton fell off quickly after 5, and the library windows had already gone mirror dark, reflecting books, lamps, and tired faces back into the room. In that reflection, Mark saw the child stand and move 2 steps toward him, then pause with one hand on the shelf edge. He did not crouch. Men his size looming over children made most kids fold inward, and he had learned to reduce himself by stillness instead. He lowered his head slightly and let his hands hang open where she could see them. The engines outside idled in a long breath. Rain traced narrow lines down the glass. She came 1 step closer. Her voice reached him below copier noise, below fluorescent hum, below the steady mechanical pulse from the street. "Please don't let him find us," she whispered. The sentence landed in him with the old, precise force of orders received under fire. Not dramatic, not loud, absolutely clear. His reason had time to list complications, jurisdiction, policy, timing, deputies, procedures, what a man on parole should and should not involve himself in. His body moved before any of that assembled. He turned his shoulders so he stood between the child and the library door without making a show of it. He looked once at the mother, who had gone still with the papers in her hand as if she had expected this ask, and dreaded it at the same time. "You're not alone now," he said. He did not add comfort language he could not guarantee. He did not ask for background details in front of strangers. He took in the camera dome above the reference desk, the exit signs, the line of sight to the stairwell, the clerk reaching for the phone and then stopping. His instincts had kept him and other people alive in places where hesitation cost more than bruises and paperwork. They activated now with the same grim economy, as familiar as breath. Mark reached for his folded legal pad, tore off the top sheet with the benefits notes, turned it over, and wrote 3 names he trusted to answer on the first ring, then slid the pencil behind his ear and looked through the dark window at the north lawn, where 800 riders waited in disciplined rows beneath courthouse lights. He kept looking at the lawn for one more second, then folded the torn sheet once and slipped it into his inside pocket instead of leaving it on the table. The library clock above the periodicals shelf clicked to 5:09. Elaine Dobbins had already turned off one of the 2 desk lamps, and the room dropped into a flatter light that made everyone look tired and slightly gray. Mark turned back toward the mother and daughter, the old shoulder pulling tight across his chest. As he moved, and he read the room the way he had once read motor pools after incoming. Exits first, people second, noise last. The copier was quiet. The engines outside were not. The mother still held the stack of copies as if she did not trust gravity with them. Her fingers had left crescent-shaped dents in the top page where the judge's signature sat slightly left of center. Mark kept his voice low enough that it could not carry to the terminals. "Who did you ask for help?" he said. "And when?" She blinked at him, then at the child, then at the papers in her hand, running through memory not by story but by sequence. "Security first," she said, "at noon. Then civil filings, then intake, then the deputy by the west desk." She swallowed and glanced at the camera dome over reference. Then a pastor in the hall. He said he'd pray for us. Then a woman from probation told me to come back tomorrow because the service window closes at 4:30. Mark nodded once and pulled the pencil from behind his ear. He wrote on the back of the veteran's worksheet in heavy block print, each line short, each line functional. Noon security, civil filings, intake, west desk deputy, pastor, probation. He looked up. "Anyone else?" And the mother gave a dry laugh that never reached her face. "A lot of anyone else." She shifted the folder under her arm and began counting with her thumb against the edge of the plastic, 1 press at a time. 2 clerks in records, 1 bailiff, 1 woman with juror sticker who heard me ask and looked away, the deputy in cruiser 214 when we came out to the curb. He rolled down his window, asked if we were waiting for a ride, and then said he couldn't stay parked there. She paused and restarted, forcing order onto a day that had refused it. 2 neighbors from Morrow Street. They know him. They crossed to the other side. Elaine had stopped stamping and was listening now despite herself, one hand resting on the return cart. Bifocals slid halfway down her nose. At the far terminal, the college kid stood, collected his printout, and left without meeting anyone's eyes. The door clicked shut behind him, and the room seemed larger and emptier than it had a minute before. Mark kept writing. "How many total?" The mother looked at the clock, then at the child's wet socks, then at him. 63, she said. Since noon. Her voice did not rise. 63 people watched me ask where to wait so he couldn't walk up and take her. Mark repeated it back to lock it in place. 63 total. That number sat between them with more weight than the packet in her hands. 63. A pastor with rain on his cuffs, a deputy in marked cruiser 214, 2 courthouse clerks with county IDs clipped to their cardigans, 1 probation officer with a lanyard full of keys, 11 jurors on smoke break under the awning where the wind didn't hit as hard, 2 neighbors who knew exactly why she was shaking, 47 others who saw, heard, and kept moving because policy gave them language to call indifference neutral. Every single one kept going. The child had not changed posture while they spoke. She stayed cross-legged by the code shelves, rabbit tucked beneath her chin, one hand resting on the sneaker toe nearest her knee as if she were anchoring herself to the only object she could control. She wasn't crying. That was the thing that landed in Elaine Dobbins, in Mark, in the mother herself, when she finally let her eyes settle on her daughter's face. The child had passed through fear and come out the other side into procedure, already trained to wait quietly so adults could decide whether she counted as urgent. At 5:10, the overhead lights nearest the archives aisle switched off automatically, leaving that side of the room in a muted blue shadow. The closing chime did not sound because the speaker had been broken since spring, and no one had filed a second maintenance request after the first disappeared in the system. Elaine cleared her throat. "Library is closed," she said, and then, after a breath, "You can stay for a few minutes." She did not look at Mark when she said it. She looked at the child. The mother's knees gave a small tremor as adrenaline started to drain, and she lowered herself into the nearest chair without fully sitting, as if ready to stand again on command. Mark stepped back toward the shelf edge so he could keep both door and stairwell in his line of sight. He had learned, in places where uncertainty came with a blast radius, that panic narrowed vision faster than darkness. He widened his stance and let his breathing settle into a working rhythm. The engines outside continued their low, layered pulse under the building. The child stood then, rabbit in both hands, and crossed the short stretch of carpet toward him. She stopped close enough to see the pale ridge of scar tissue down his cheek and the faded ink on his forearm, where an old unit insignia had blurred into blue-gray clouds. She tilted her head, studying his face with the concentration children brought to things adults pretended not to notice. Her voice came out as a thread. "Please don't let him find us," she whispered. She had said it once already, but this time there was no copy or noise to hide behind, no movement around them to carry the words away. The sentence entered the room clean and stayed there. Her mother closed her eyes for a second and pressed her thumb hard into the folded edge of the restraining order until the paper bent. Mark lowered himself one notch by bending at the knees, not enough to turn it into theater, enough to meet her gaze without looming. He kept his hands open, palms visible, rough knuckles scarred and dry from years of cold rides and chop solving. "You're not alone now," he said. "Now." The girl nodded once, the smallest nod, and shifted the rabbit from left arm to right. She lifted one damp foot and set it down again, testing whether she could stand still without shaking. Mark noticed the cardboard insole peeking at the heel where the sneaker seam had split. He noticed the careful double knots in the laces, still intact after rain and courthouse floors and hours of waiting. He noticed, too, that she positioned herself half a step behind his left side when she stopped moving, as if her body had already selected him as cover. The mother opened her eyes and looked straight at him for the first time. "He said he'd come before dark," she said. No name. She did not need one. "He said papers don't stop him." Mark held her gaze and gave one short nod that acknowledged both the threat and the fact that she had survived long enough to get this far. "Where's your safe address filed?" "Confidential box on the petition." "Any service confirmation yet?" She shook her head. "Not entered." Mark absorbed that, then turned to Elaine. "Is there another exit off this floor?" Elaine pointed toward the rear stacks. "Staff stair to the loading dock. Alarmed after 6. She hesitated, then added, "The vestibule by circulation stays unlocked until the building supervisor does rounds." "Good," Mark said. By the third week of October, evening rain in Dayton had a way of flattening every sound except engines and shoes, and through the narrow windows the city was already sliding into that wet, metallic dusk that made courthouse stone look almost black. Mark reached into his vest and took out the flip phone with the cracked hinge. He checked the battery bar. 2 blocks left. Enough for one call. He spoke to the mother without looking away from the door. "I'm stepping out 30 seconds. Stay in this room. Keep her where she can see one door and one adult." His tone was plain, procedural, the way mechanics gave instructions over open engines. "If anyone asks, you're waiting for escort." She gripped the folder tighter. "Who are you calling?" He answered without pause. "People who show up." He moved through the circulation gate and into the small vestibule, where donation bins sat against the wall under a bulletin board full of outdated legal aid flyers. Rain tapped the wired glass pane in tight, fast ticks. The air smelled of wet wool, toner, and cold concrete drifting up the stairwell. He opened the flip phone, pressed a number from memory, and listened to one ring, then half of a second. The line clicked. A man's voice answered, low and awake. "Yeah?" Mark kept it short, each phrase shaped for no misunderstanding. "Courthouse North steps," he said. "Full patch holds. Titan North line. 2-rider escort to library exit. 1 copies runner. 10-minute turn." A beat of silence held on the line. Not hesitation, confirmation. Then the voice said, "Received." Mark closed the phone and stood one moment in the vestibule, listening to the rain strike glass and the building settle around him. While inside the library, a child with a one-eyed rabbit waited beside a shelf of Ohio law, and the result of that call had not yet reached the door. The first change was not loud. It was structural, a shift in frequency more than volume, the way a bridge hums differently when weight redistributes across its span. Mark felt it through the soles of his boots in the vestibule before he heard it cleanly in his ears. Engines that had been idling separately, finding one shared cadence. Rain stitched against the wired glass in fast silver lines, and somewhere in the stairwell a door closer sighed shut. But beneath those small sounds, the mechanical note thickened and spread, moving through concrete, steel handrails, and the hollow metal frames of courthouse windows until the whole building seemed to hold one low breath. He opened the vestibule door and stepped back into the library with the flip phone already folded, eyes on the mother and daughter first, then the exits. The little girl stood where he had left her, one shoulder tucked behind his left side, rabbit clamped under her arm. Her mother rose from the chair in one controlled motion that looked steady from a distance and cost her effort up close. Elaine Dobbins had both hands flat on the circulation desk now. Peppermint tin pushed aside, head tilted as if listening for weather. The tone under the floor deepened again, less like idling traffic and more like distant thunder rolling over flat land and deciding to stay. At 5:11, courthouse routines began to fracture at the edges. 2 clerks from records came up the stairs toward the library doors and stopped halfway down the corridor when the sound reached them. Through the terrazzo, their badges swinging on lanyards against damp cardigans. A deputy's radio crackled in the hall, clipped and fast, then clipped again with a second voice, asking for status at north and west entries. No one in the library moved toward panic. They moved toward positions. Elaine reached under the desk, took out the key ring she normally used for closing, and set it where Mark could see it without offering it yet. The rumble climbed one step higher and entered bone. It came through chair legs, through the metal shelf uprights, through the copier glass still warm from the mother's packet, and then through bodies that had been pretending all day they could stay outside events by citing policy. Mark watched the child's eyes widen at the vibration in the floor. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. She had learned to map danger by sound. He crouched a notch, enough for her to hear him without anyone else leaning in. "That's our people moving," he said. "Stay with your mom. Keep the rabbit tight." She nodded once and shifted closer to her mother's knee. Outside the narrow windows, sight caught up to sound in fragments. First headlights sweeping in a slow arc across rain-dark stone. Then handlebars and front forks sliding past the glass at measured intervals. Then full bikes in disciplined file, rolling two abreast around the north loop and peeling off by assignment. Rear tires whispering on wet pavement. No horns, no shouted commands. The riders who had been posted on the lawn restarted in sequence and repositioned with exact spacing, filling lanes the way floodwater fills channels carved long before the storm. A courthouse was built to trust documents and doors. This movement trusted timing. A bailiff appeared at the library threshold, chest rising hard under his uniform shirt. Who gave instructions to restage that line? He said to no one and everyone, eyes bouncing from Mark's cut to Elaine's keys to the mother clutching the blue ink packet. Mark did not answer the premise. North corridor stays clear, he said. You keep your emergency lane. Nobody blocks your med access. The bailiff opened his mouth, looked through the window at the riders settling into new slots with cleaner geometry than most parade permits ever produced, and closed it. He stepped aside as if the building itself had told him where to stand. The count came in like a roll call, verified and repeated until uncertainty had nowhere to hide. A road captain at the north doors relayed to dispatch. Dispatch relayed to the sheriff's desk. A deputy in the hall repeated it into his shoulder mic with the reluctant precision of a man documenting a fact he did not expect to record on a Thursday. 800 motorcycles. 800 riders. Mark heard the number twice through radio bleed and once more from the stairwell where two clerks whispered it to each other as if saying it softly might reduce what it meant. It did not reduce anything. He moved to the window edge and took in the full layout. 40 riders locked on the north entrance in two arcs, outer arc facing street, inner arc facing doors. 40 at south with the same spacing. 24 split across east and west service points where county staff usually left after hours, 8 per corner, and the rest in rotating pairs. 6 riders at curbside by dispatch access, not blocking, documenting. 2 medics from the chapter support crew parked off the ambulance lane with kits closed and visible, there if needed, and not pretending to be what they were not. The choreography had no wasted motion. That was the part that unsettled the building more than the leather did. Mark turned back to the mother. You walk when I say walk. No stops for questions in the hall. She pressed the folder to her chest and nodded, throat working once before sound came. Where are we going? First, to domestic violence intake for immediate entry confirmation, he said. Then safe room at New Mercy basement if intake drags. Her fingers tightened on the packet at the church name, as if hearing a location gave panic edges she could hold. He looked to Elaine. Back stair unlock. Elaine pushed the key ring across the desk. Staff stair, second door left, she said. Alarm bypass still works if you close it slow. By 5:13, the building had begun to witness what enforcement looked like when treated as a logistical problem instead of an abstract value. Mark led them from the library through the dim rear aisle where the automatic lights lagged and then blinked awake, past shelves of bound Ohio reports no one had touched in months, to the staff stair door with chipped gray paint and a push bar worn bright by decades of palms. He cracked it, listened, and heard the rumble outside settle into a lower idle, while boots took positions under the overhang below. He motioned the mother forward, child between them, and kept one hand on the door to prevent the alarm latch from snapping. The girl carried her own rabbit and held her mother's cardigan hem with 2 fingers. At the landing, they met the first 2 escorts, both riders, both helmets off, rain beaded in their beards and on their vest seams. One was Luis Pena, 46, chapter sergeant-at-arms, with a healed burn scar up his neck from a shop fire in 2008 and a habit of counting exits allowed under stress. The other was Tuck Garner, 39, former diesel mechanic, hands blackened at the cuticles no matter how hard he scrubbed. They gave no speeches. Luis nodded once at Mark and said, "Route A clear. Route B dry if they need cover." Tuck held out a folded children's rain poncho still in pharmacy plastic and crouched to the girl's height without touching her. "For your rabbit, too, if you want," he said. She looked at Mark. Mark nodded. She took it. The wall completed itself in layers as they reached the first-floor service corridor. Riders who had been stationary rotated to fresh positions every 6 minutes, engines off at inner posts, on at outer posts for rapid shift. 2 riders stood at each corridor, mouth inside visual range of courthouse cameras. Hands visible, feet set shoulder width, creating a human lane that neither trapped nor exposed. At the north public doors, 40 helmets hung from handlebars in a line like black bowls catching rain, while riders faced outward toward street traffic and inward toward the vestibule in alternating pairs so no approach went unwatched. Nobody pounded doors, nobody taunted deputies. They built structure and held it. A lieutenant from the sheriff's office met them near records, rain still on his sleeves. He carried a clipboard and the expression of a man whose evening had been rewritten by force of organization. "Protected party order needs immediate statewide entry," Mark said before the lieutenant could begin with preamble. "Service status pending since noon. You've got 63 ignored contacts and a credible pre-dark threat." The lieutenant looked at the mother, then at the child in the clear poncho with the rabbit under plastic, then at the corridor filled with silent riders holding lane discipline like trained traffic control. "Bring the paperwork," he said. "Now." He did not say tomorrow. Inside records, fluorescent lights buzzed, and a printer woke with a grinding clatter. 2 clerks who had looked away earlier began keying data with sudden speed, eyes fixed on their monitors. One read fields aloud for confirmation, voice clipped and formal. Protected party name, date of birth, respondent restrictions, no contact radius, residence confidentiality flag. The mother answered each item in a thin but steady voice, hands no longer shaking enough to lose the page. Through the half-open records door came the muffled pulse of engines outside and the occasional short transmission from deputies coordinating entry points they had neglected, until this pressure made neglect visible. Mark stood at the threshold with Luis, watching both directions, counting heads and doors. At 5:19, the first printed enforcement confirmation slid from the machine, warm and slightly curled at the edge. The clerk stamped it, then stamped 2 copies, ink dark and fresh. She held one out to the mother with both hands, an unintentional gesture of respect learned too late, but real in that moment. "Entered statewide," she said. "Priority violation flag attached." The mother took the page and exhaled through parted lips, a sound so small it nearly vanished under the generator hum. Her daughter looked up at the stamped header and then at Mark as if waiting for translation. He gave her the plain version. "Paper means something now," he said. They moved again, this time through the north hall toward the protected corridor leading out to the church route. Riders tightened the line as they approached, not crowding, simply reducing gaps so sightlines stayed broken from street to child. A deputy at the interior doors stepped back and held the bar open without being asked. Rain smell came in cold and clean. The rumble stayed low, controlled, a living perimeter rather than a spectacle. As the mother passed between the 2 nearest riders, she kept one hand on the restraining order inside her jacket and the other on her daughter's shoulder. The girl reached across that narrow space, and placed her small hand on Mark's scarred knuckles for 3 seconds, then let go when the corridor turned toward safety. The corridor turned right at the north vestibule and opened into rain that had thinned from steady drizzle to a fine, cold mist, the kind that settled on leather and hair without announcing itself. Mark stepped out first, then angled left to block the line of sight from Main Street, while Louise and Tuck widened the lane with 2 quiet hand signals, and the wall of riders adjusted as one machine with 800 separate engines. The courthouse clock above the steps read 5:27, 1 minute fast as always, and the county finally moved at the speed of the people it had mistrusted. No one cheered. No one spoke above a working voice. 40 helmets turned toward the curb, 40 toward the doors, and the mother and child passed through that narrow moving corridor, as if steel and rain and old stone had been measured for them in advance. The girl kept her right hand on her mother's cardigan hem, and the rabbit under the clear poncho. One black eye missing, fabric ear bent from being held too long. Mark stayed on her left, close enough to intercept, far enough not to crowd, and when they reached the first parked bike on the church road, he felt her fingers find his knuckles again for balance as she stepped over a shallow gutter full of rainwater and wet leaves. By 5:31, they were 4 blocks east at New Mercy Church, red brick walls darkened by weather, basement lights already on behind narrow windows level with the sidewalk. The side door had been propped with a rubber wedge and a hymn book wrapped in plastic. Inside, the stairwell smelled of old coffee, floor wax, and damp coats drying on hooks. 2 women from the parish office waited at the landing with towels and a box of children's socks, both moving with the efficient quiet of people who understood urgency without asking for details. Mark watched the mother hesitate at the threshold and then enter when she saw the room itself. Folding tables, a space heater humming by cinder block wall, 3 mismatched quilts, no cameras, 2 exits visible from every chair. The riders took posts outside without instruction. 6 along the church lot, 6 at the alley mouth, 2 rotating pairs by the side entrance, and a wider ring on the next block, where chrome flashed dull under street lamps. Engines dropped to idle in staggered cycles to keep the perimeter warm and ready. Every 3rd bike stayed off to reduce noise and leave listening space. Inside the basement, the mechanical thrum became a low pulse under the heater fan, less like threat than proof of presence. The mother sat on a metal chair and started to unzip her jacket, then stopped and checked the packet first. Original order in the blue clip. 1 copy from records. 1 stamped enforcement confirmation. Custody forms in the cracked plastic folder. A 4th copy folded small in the cardigan pocket where she had pressed it earlier. She touched each page in sequence and placed them inside a gallon freezer bag one parish worker handed her, sealing the top twice and writing the date with a black marker that squeaked on plastic. Mark took the back page from his vest, the one where he had listed noon security, civil filings, intake, West Desk deputy, pastor, probation, cruiser 214, and 63 total, and passed it to Louise, who photographed it with timestamp and sent it to dispatch intake for attachment to the incident log. Nothing from that day floated loose. Tuck crouched by the girl and offered dry socks from the box, waiting until she nodded before he touched the shoelaces. Her Walmart sneakers came off with a soft tug, water beading on the rubber toe where pink stars had almost worn away. The cardboard insoles slid out dark and warped. Tuck looked at Mark once, then cut 2 new inserts from the back cover of an unused legal pad that one parish worker found in a supply drawer, trimming them with EMT shears so they fit heel and arch. The girl watched his hands with full concentration. When he finished, Mark took the left shoe, threaded the lace through the frayed eyelet, and tied a careful double knot exactly the way her mother had done in the restroom. She wasn't crying. She leaned forward on the folding chair, rabbit in lap, and placed her small palm over Mark's scarred knuckles while he tightened the second knot. That was the whole gesture. Her hand was warm from the towel. His was cold from rain. At 5:42, Deputy Carl Minter came down the basement stairs without his hat, radio clipped but quiet, rain still on his sleeves. He stopped 2 steps into the room, looked at the mother, then at the child's shoes, now lying neatly under the chair, and held out a single-page form in a clear sleeve. "Statewide entry confirmed," he said. "Priority violation response active. Safe address flag locked." He glanced once at Mark before continuing, words plain and without excuse. "Cruiser 214 is assigned pass-by every 15 minutes on this block tonight, plus stationary coverage on call. If the order is breached, dispatch jumps it to top tier." He set the sleeve on the table beside the sealed packet, not in her hands, giving her space to decide when to touch it. The mother nodded, and for the first time that day, her shoulders dropped from her ears. "Thank you," she said, voice thin but steady. Carl looked as if he might add something about noon, about policy, about why he had kept driving when he first saw her by the curb. He did not. He stepped back toward the stairs and left the sentence unfinished, and he never came back to finish it. At 5:54, Luis's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, then passed it to Mark. Dispatch note, case number attached, signed by the same lieutenant from records. Service copy delivered to on-call unit at 5:37. Respondent located and served at 5:51. Acknowledgement logged. Enforcement copy uploaded. All county contacts time-stamped. Mark read it once and handed the phone to the mother so she could see the words in the black text, with the time at the top. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a second, then lowered to the table beside the freezer bag. Paper had been translated into action before night. Elaine Dobbins arrived at 6:03 carrying a canvas tote and her peppermint tin, hair damp from the walk between buildings. She set the tote near Mark's chair and opened it to show what she had brought from the library after closing: his scratched reading glasses, the veteran's benefit packet for the younger writer, and the circulation key ring she had forgotten he still had in his pocket after the staff stair door. He returned the keys to her palm. She held them, looked at the child's rabbit, and said quietly to the mother, "I should have said more upstairs." The mother did not make her pay for the full weight of that confession. She only nodded once and moved the extra stamped copy of the order toward Elaine. "Keep this at the desk," she said, "if he asks." Elaine put her hand over the page and nodded back. By 6:11, the rain had started again, tapping the basement windows in even strokes, and the riders outside rotated shifts without breaking the perimeter. Donna Hartwell from the diner sent down 2 covered bowls of chicken soup and a sleeve of crackers through a club prospect, along with a receipt she had marked "paid in blue pen." The pastor who had promised prayer in the hallway never appeared. Neither did the 2 neighbors from Morrow Street. The bailiff who asked who gave instructions never asked again. The girl finished half a bowl, then set the spoon down and arranged her shoes, side by side under the folding chair, toes aligned, double knots facing out. She climbed into her mother's lap with the rabbit between them and reached one hand back until her fingers found Mark's again, without looking. He let his hand rest there, still as stone, while engines idled outside in measured intervals and courthouse paperwork dried flat inside a sealed bag on the table. Sometimes the line between threat and protection is drawn by reputation, and sometimes it is drawn by who arrives, stays, and makes the paper mean what it says. In that basement, on a wet Thursday evening, the county did not change by argument. It changed because a 7-year-old's hand could finally unclench.